Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to Thinking in English, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. On today's episode, let's take a look at a very controversial debate. Should cannabis be legal? Let's look at both sides of the argument, learn some new vocabulary, think in English, and eventually decide what you think is the correct answer. You can check out the full transcript of the episode at the Thinking in English blog, and why not have a look at my Instagram page too, Thinking in English podcast on Instagram. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on my blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. To derive. To derive. To get something from something else. For example, many people derive pleasure from work. To cultivate. To cultivate. To grow a crop. As in, they cultivate beans and corn on their farm. Psychoactive. Psychoactive. A psychoactive drug affects your mind. For example, THC is the psychoactive component of cannabis. Consensus. Consensus. Generally accepted opinion or decision. For example, there was no consensus reached at yesterday's meeting. Possession. Possession. The fact you own or have something. As in, he is in possession of a very valuable watch. Confiscate. Confiscate. To take possession away from someone, usually as a punishment. For instance, the teacher confiscated my phone. To legalize. To legalize. To allow something by law, as in, same-sex marriage has now been legalized in many European countries. Cost. Cost. Something that is given, needed, or lost in order to get a particular thing. For example, I thought about changing jobs, but the costs outweigh the benefits. What is cannabis? While some of you might think you already know the answer to this question, some of the uses and history of cannabis may be surprising to you. Cannabis is the scientific name for a plant that grows naturally in many parts of the world. The plant and the products derived from it have an incredibly long history connected with human societies. Evidence suggests that cannabis was being cultivated in parts of China and Central Asia over 4,000 years ago. Before new materials were invented in the past few centuries, the cannabis plant was used for a large part of the world's rope supply. The plant has also been used as animal feed, clothing, medicine, and even today as an alternative to milk. If you see hemp milk in your supermarket, it comes from the hemp plant, which is a cannabis plant. However, cannabis is best known as a drug. For thousands of years, cannabis has been used recreationally and contains a psychoactive ingredient called THC that causes people to get high. As a drug, cannabis famously has many different names. Over 1,000 English nicknames actually exist for cannabis. So, cannabis, marijuana, weed, whatever you call it, it's controversial. The approach towards the drug varies widely across the globe. And despite the thousands of years of history and use, the world seems no closer to reaching a consensus on the issue. At one end of the scale, the drug is highly illegal in some countries. And if you are caught with the drug in your possession, you could be facing years in prison. Last year, a British football coach in the UAE was found in possession of CBD oil. CBD is derived from cannabis, but without the plant's psychoactive properties, and it has become a legal and common health product. Unfortunately for the football coach, the 4 bottles of CBD oil that he purchased had small traces of the psychoactive substance THC, which is also found in normal cannabis, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, which was later reduced to 10 years. So, a product that is completely legal in the UK and in the US and many other places was considered so dangerous in the United Arab Emirates that it warranted a 25-year prison sentence. The UAE is not alone in criminalizing cannabis. In Singapore, you can be imprisoned for up to 10 years and fined $20,000 for possession. South Korea treats cannabis the same as any other drug and actually punishes those found with the drug in their system, which means that people who took cannabis in another country where it is legal and then travel to Korea could be arrested if traces are found in their blood or hair. And harsh punishments are also told out in many Middle Eastern and other Asian countries, even for possessing just a small amount of the drug. In more countries, recreational use of cannabis, so for fun or pleasure rather than medical needs, is illegal. However, many of those places have decriminalized or reduced punishments, especially for possession of small amounts. In these countries, a small fine would usually be issued and the drug would be confiscated. Some places have legalized cannabis for medical use. The plant has been used in medical treatments for thousands of years, and research suggests it has a number of beneficial properties for certain illnesses or medical conditions. Countries including Argentina, Germany, New Zealand, Malawi, and Israel all allow medical cannabis use to some extent. And some countries have legalized cannabis use completely. As of 2022, Canada, Georgia, Malta, Mexico, South Africa, and Uruguay have legalized recreational use of the drug. Moreover, 18 United States and the Australian Capital Territory have similarly legalized possession in their territories. Uruguay and Canada have even allowed the national commercial sale of the drug through legalized and regulated properties. Now, as you can see from this brief recap, the world is incredibly divided over how to deal with cannabis. Some countries will imprison you for over 10 years for possessing the drug, others will sell it to you legally from official stores. So, should cannabis be legal? Today, I want to look at some of the arguments surrounding the legalization of cannabis. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the legalization of the recreational use of cannabis. As always, I'll present both sides of the debate without bias, and it's up to you to decide your own opinion. It's up to you to think in English. Importantly, this isn't a debate over your personal opinion about the drug. You can like it or you can hate it for all I care. But it's a debate over whether it should be legal or not. There are plenty of legal things that are dangerous and that I don't like and I never want to do, like skydiving. But it doesn't mean I think skydiving should be illegal, just because I don't like it and I don't want to do it. And the same is true with debates about drugs. Ig- Ignore your own personal opinion over whether you like or hate cannabis and approach the topic logically and without bias. Learning to think about both sides of an argument, especially a controversial debate, is an incredibly important and valuable skill. In fact, it is very useful for IELTS and other English proficiency tests. And this question might come up in an exam one day. You never know. I'll start by introducing the pro legalization arguments and then introduce the anti legalization arguments before giving a few concluding remarks. So, should cannabis be legal? Let's start with the arguments that cannabis should be legal. First, one of the major arguments in support of legalizing cannabis is that it could boost the economy. In 2016, the US legal marijuana industry generated $7.2 million in economic activity, and millions more dollars were paid in taxes by cannabis related businesses. For example, in Colorado, cannabis actually creates more tax revenue than alcohol. Industries including tourism, food, banking, and construction could all benefit from legalization. The taxes collected from cannabis use and cannabis sales could be used to fund public programs and policies. Things like school programs, drug treatments, housing assistance schemes, and mental health centers could all be funded from the money raised through legalizing cannabis. Another really important argument is that legal cannabis can be regulated by governments and scientists. If you buy a drug on the street, you don't actually know what you are buying, if it is safe, or if it is what you expected. By legalizing the products, governments are then able to force companies to meet certain standards and ensure their cannabis is not too dangerous. For instance, regulations could include testing products to see if there are harmful chemicals added or if it is a pure cannabis sample, making sure that products are labeled correctly, and packaging the product in a safe and secure way. In fact, many people argue that cannabis is actually less dangerous and less harmful than tobacco and alcohol. And both tobacco and alcohol are perfectly legal in most countries. As you probably know, tobacco and alcohol are known to cause diseases like cancer, heart failure, and liver diseases, lung diseases. Hundreds of thousands of people die every year due to alcohol use, but there has never been a recorded case of death from a cannabis overdose. So, if a person wants to use the product and it is less dangerous than commonly available drugs like alcohol, surely people should be free to make their own decisions and choices. And furthermore, proponents of legislation argue that legalizing cannabis will help take money away from criminal gangs and drug cartels. According to some sources, after the legalization of the drug in Washington and Colorado, Mexican drug cartels lost around 2.7 billion US dollars in profit. Rather than turning to illegal dealers and gangs, people should be able to buy regulated and taxed cannabis from a legal shop. Now, let's take a look at the arguments why cannabis should not be legal. First, the legalization of cannabis is opposed by a number of leading medical organizations around the world. Famously, the American Medical Association believes that cannabis is a dangerous drug and, as such, is a public health concern. Legalizing recreational use of the drug could lead to increased health problems and issues for both users and those around them. Now, why would cannabis be considered harmful or dangerous? Evidence suggests that smoking damages the lungs, especially if smoking unfiltered cannabis. Cannabis also has been linked to mental illnesses and the slow development of the brain. Opponents of cannabis legislation often point to the damaging effects of the drug when voicing their opposition. Cannabis use is not only linked to health issues, but also has been associated with a lack of motivation and increased accidents. In Colorado, workplace accidents involving employees using cannabis tripled within a year of cannabis legislation. Long term cannabis use can also impact the parts of the brain responsible for motivation and dedication. By legalizing cannabis, there are also a number of potential social costs. More accidents could occur, increased need for medical treatment, addiction treatments, crime increases, and negative impacts on businesses. It is estimated that tax money raised from legalizing cannabis would not even be close to the costs incurred by the country or state in general. Moreover, cannabis production is usually not environmentally friendly. The plants require a significant amount of water to grow, and water is already a scarce resource in many places. If grown indoors, the plant also requires expensive heating and lighting, which could be seen as harmful to the environment. And finally, some drug cartels and gangs have actually benefited from cannabis legislation in US states so far. As illegal cannabis does not require expensive testing, taxation, and regulation, the black market is able to charge less for their products. According to the Colorado Attorney General, legalization of cannabis has inadvertently helped fuel the business of Mexican drug cartels. Cartels are now trading drugs like heroin for marijuana, and the trade has since opened the door to drug and human trafficking. On today's episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to discuss the question of cannabis legislation and legalization. On the one side, supporters of legalization suggest that legal cannabis will boost the economy, create new jobs, make the drug safer, and that people should be free to choose for themselves if they use cannabis. On the other side, opponents argue that cannabis causes health and social issues, and that it should be discouraged. Of course, I was not able to cover every single argument in today's episode. So, if you know any other arguments or opinions, please leave a comment and let me know what I missed out. But based on my introduction to this debate today, what do you think? After listening to my arguments, do you think cannabis should be legal? Or should it be illegal? And what is the situation in your country? Is cannabis legal recreationally or medically? Or is it illegal? Could you go to prison for possession of cannabis in your country? Let us know in the comments on the blog or the comments on Spotify. And yeah, reach out to me and let me know your opinion. I really, really appreciate hearing from all of my listeners. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thinking in English podcast. Please leave a rating on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen. If you're on Apple, write a review. That really, really help the podcast and help Thinking in English grow. Check out some of my other episodes. You can look through the list on the Thinking in English blog. There's lots of great content on the blog and also lots of great content on my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast on the Instagram. I'm trying to hit 500 followers not 500 followers, 500 likes on Spotify, and hopefully by the end of April, close to 4,000 followers on Instagram. So hopefully you can help me achieve these goals. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can always donate. But the best way really is sharing with your friends, following on Spotify, making sure you listen to the whole episode, even to the me speaking right now. And yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you have an excellent day.